The thing about Rustwater Correctional, the Angola satellite facility nobody talks about, is that it floods every spring. Not the cells, thank Christ, but the yard turns into this soup of red mud and whatever the Mississippi decides to wash up. Been here 3 years for vehicular manslaughter, and I've learned to read the water levels like other guys read their appeal paperwork. When it creeps past the basketball court's three-point line, you know the septic system's gonna back up within 2 days. Warden Thibodeau doesn't give a shit. Says flooding builds character. I was rewiring the visiting room's intercom system when they announced Family Day would run late. Some kind of special extension because of Easter weekend, which was Thibodeau's way of looking good for the state inspectors without actually fixing anything that mattered. My hands were elbow deep in a junction box that probably hadn't been serviced since the Clinton administration, and I was half listening to Officer Prejean complain about his truck payment when I heard Thibodeau's voice crackle through the PA. All family visits extended until 1600 hours. I repeat, extended visiting until 1600. My stomach did that thing it does whenever I think about Danny. My boy, 14 now. Marie was supposed to bring him today for the first time in 8 months. Last time I saw him, he wouldn't look at me, just stared at his sneakers, these blue Nikes that were already too small for him. Marie bought them at the outlet mall in Baton Rouge, she told me later. Couldn't afford the real Nike store. That detail stuck with me for some reason. Like if I'd been there, working my electrician's wage instead of rotting in here, maybe the kid could have had shoes that fit. You listening, Guidry? Prejean's voice cut through my thoughts. He always called me by my last name, like we were in the military instead of a Category 3 prison that smelled like mold and desperation. Yeah, your transmission's slipping. Take it to Rodrigo's on Highway 61, not that dealership. They'll fuck you on labor. How you know about transmissions? Thought you did electrical. Did everything before this. Had to. I twisted 2 wires together, the copper strands biting into my fingers. No work gloves in the supply closet for 3 weeks. Typical. You fix enough houses in St. Bernard Parish, you learn plumbing, electrical, HVAC, whatever the fuck pays. People down there can't afford specialists. I was rambling. Do that when I'm nervous. Marie said Danny didn't want to come today. Said he had a friend's birthday party, some kid named Jackson who lived in one of those subdivisions with the fake lakes. But she made him come anyway because the court order said monthly visits minimum. So now he was here, probably sitting in that visiting room with the taped-up chairs and vending machines that ate your dollars, hating me even more for ruining his Saturday. The intercom I was fixing crackled to life suddenly, not the PA system, but the direct line from the control booth. Guidry, you done with that thing? Need you in C block. Got a light fixture spitting sparks. C block. Maximum security. Where they kept the guys who'd done worse things than put a Dodge Ram into a telephone pole while drunk. The really broken ones. Gimme 5 minutes, I called back, though nobody was in the room to hear me. Habit from working in occupied houses, always announcing yourself before you do something. Let people know you're not a threat. That's when I heard it. Not heard, felt. This low vibration through the floor, like somebody dropped something heavy on the tier above us. Except we were on the ground floor, and the visiting room was isolated from the main blocks. Prejean felt it too. Stopped mid-sentence about his truck and looked up at the ceiling. The fuck was that? I pulled my hands out of the junction box, careful not to touch the live wires I'd been dancing around. Probably nothing. Foundation shifts in this place. Whole buildings sinking into the swamp. I tried to sound confident, but my voice did that thing where it goes up at the end, turning statements into questions. The vibration came again. Longer this time. And underneath it, a sound like, I don't know how to describe it. Like when you're at the Superdome and 70,000 people start stomping their feet at once, except worse. Hungrier. Prejean's radio squawked. Thibodeau's voice, but different. Tighter. All officers to stations. Initiate lockdown protocol. This is not a drill. What the hell? Prejean grabbed his radio. Control, this is Prejean in visiting. What's the situation? Static. Then another voice, younger. Probably Davis from the control booth. We've got, Jesus Christ, C-Block's gone crazy. There. The radio cut off mid-sentence. I've done enough construction work to know what panic sounds like in a man's voice. It's different from anger or fear. Panic is when your brain starts writing checks your body can't cash. Davis sounded like he was about to bounce one. Prejean's face went pale under his sunburn. He was from Terrebonne Parish, grew up fishing for redfish, and despite 3 years working Rustwater, he still had that look like he expected fairness from the world. "Stay here," he told me. "Don't fucking move." He headed for the door, hand on his pepper spray. They didn't carry guns inside the walls, only in the towers. I watched him go, and that's when my stomach really dropped. Because family day meant the visiting room was full. And if they were initiating lockdown, that meant Danny was about to get locked in here with 24 other inmates and their families. I couldn't see into the main visiting area from where I was. The intercom room was basically a glorified closet off the check-in corridor. But I could hear voices rising. Questions. A kid crying. Marie's voice maybe, asking someone what was happening. Fuck staying put. I left the junction box hanging open, live wires and all, and pushed through the door into the corridor. Prejean was already halfway to the visiting room entrance, which was a reinforced door with wire mesh glass. He had his radio up to his ear, but I could tell from his posture he wasn't getting anything useful. The door to the visiting room was still open, hadn't sealed yet. That's when I saw Danny. He was standing by the vending machines with Marie, and he'd grown. Daguerre. His shoulders had widened out. He was wearing a Saints jersey, not one of the cheap ones, an actual Breeze jersey from when we still had a quarterback worth a damn, and those same blue Nikes, except now they fit. Marie must have finally scraped together money for new ones. His face was turning toward the commotion near the check-in desk, where other families were clustering around Officer Williams, demanding to know what was happening. I started walking faster. "Danny!" He heard me. His head snapped around, and for a second, just a second, I saw something other than resentment in his face. Maybe relief. Maybe just recognition that I was the parent who'd done something wrong, but at least I'd done it to him. Not with him like his mother had when she decided staying with a convicted drunk was too hard. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency backups kicked in, bathing everything in that sickly yellow glow that makes everyone look like they're already dead. And through the wire mesh glass in the door Prejean was approaching, I saw them. Inmates. 6, 7 of them moving wrong, like their joints were loose. They were covered in. I thought it was blood at first. But it was too dark, almost black, and it wasn't dripping so much as oozing. One of them, a guy I recognized from the chow hall, Boudreaux, did 20 years for armed robbery, had his jaw hanging at an angle that wasn't anatomically possible. But he was moving faster than Boudreaux ever moved, faster than any of them should have been able to move in County Orange. Prejean started to turn around, to shout something back at us. That's when Boudreaux hit the door. The wire mesh held. Barely. But the impact sent Prejean stumbling backward, and more of them piled up behind Boudreaux, hands slapping against the glass, leaving smears of that black shit. Not blood. Something else. I grabbed Danny by his shoulders. He was almost as tall as me now. When the hell did that happen? And pulled him back toward the intercom room. Marie was screaming questions at me, something about what's going on, we need to leave, but I wasn't listening because the door's hinges were starting to groan. Get everyone back. Prejean was shouting at Williams, and Williams, who'd been a corrections officer for 20 years and looked like he'd seen every flavor of human evil, had his pepper spray out like it would matter. The door's top hinge popped loose with a sound like a gunshot. I shoved Danny into the intercom room and yelled at Marie to follow. She did, thank Christ, along with 3 other families who'd figured out that running made more sense than asking questions. Behind us, I heard the door finally give way, heard Prejean screaming, heard Williams's pepper spray hissing uselessly, heard things that sounded wet and wrong. I slammed the intercom room door and locked it. Flimsy lock. The kind that keeps out polite people, not whatever the fuck those things were. Through the gap at the bottom, I could see shadows moving in the hallway, could hear sounds that my brain kept trying to classify as human speech but couldn't. Danny was pressed against the wall next to the exposed junction box, his Saints jersey rising and falling fast with his breathing. Marie had her phone out. No signal in here, never was, and the other families were clustering by the supply shelves like that would help. Dad! Danny's voice cracked on the word. First time he'd called me that in 8 months. What's happening? I looked at my hands. Still had that copper wire smell on my fingers. Still had calluses from 16 years of working with tools. Still had everything I needed to be a competent father, except the judgment to not drink before driving. I don't know, I told him honestly. Because that's the thing about being inside. You learn to be honest, or the lies pile up until they bury you. But we need to move. This door won't hold. Through the hallway, something that used to be Officer Prejean started pounding on the intercom room door. The pounding got worse. Not rhythmic, chaotic, like Prejean's arms were working independent of any thought process. Marie was against the far wall, phone still clutched in her hand like a talisman. The other families, two couples with teenage kids and an older woman who might have been someone's grandmother, were frozen in that particular way people freeze when reality stops making sense. I've seen it before. Job sites where OSHA violations catch up with you. Car accidents where the physics don't line up. Your brain takes a second to recalibrate, and in that second, you either start moving or you don't. I started moving. Everyone away from the door, I said, grabbing the wire strippers from my tool belt. Not much of a weapon, but better than standing there with my dick in my hand. Danny, stay behind me. Mr. Guidry, what the hell? That was one of the fathers, a guy in an LSU polo shirt who looked like he sold insurance or managed a Chick-fil-A, soft hands. The kind of guy who'd never had to change his own oil. Just move. I was already scanning the room. The intercom room wasn't big, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with electrical panels lining two walls and supplies stacked on metal shelves. One window, but it was the size of a pizza box and had bars embedded in reinforced glass. No secondary exit, because why would there be? This was a prison. Exits were what they were trying to prevent. The door shuttered. Something cracked, not the lock yet, but the frame. Cheap pine. I'd rewired enough houses to know construction shortcuts when I saw them. They'd probably bid this renovation out to the lowest contractor, someone's cousin who promised to do it for half price. Now we were paying for it. There's got to be another way out, Marie said. Her voice had that edge it got when she was about to panic for real, not just the performative panic she did when I forgot to pick up milk before the stores closed. This was the panic from 3 years ago when the state trooper knocked on our door at 2 a.m. Working on it, I moved to the wall panel I'd been fixing. The junction box was still hanging open, wires exposed. Behind it was the main conduit running up to the second floor, maintenance access to the electrical system. I'd mapped out half this prison's wiring in my head over 3 years. Knew where every circuit went, which breakers controlled which blocks, where the backup generators kicked in. I also knew the conduit shaft was maybe 2 feet wide and filled with cables, but it connected to a maintenance corridor that ran along the exterior wall. If we could get into that corridor, we could potentially reach the loading dock. If the loading dock wasn't compromised, if those things hadn't already spread to every corner of Rustwater. A lot of ifs. The door frame splintered. Prejean's arm, what was left of it, shoved through the gap, fingers clawing at air. His wedding ring was still on, I noticed. Gold band. His wife worked at the elementary school in Napoleonville. Shit. I grabbed the panel's metal cover and started unscrewing it. Phillips head screws, naturally. I dug the screwdriver from my belt and started working fast. Danny, there's a flashlight in my tool bag. Behind the shelf. Get it. He moved without arguing. Good kid. Always had been. I'd taught him how to change a tire when he was 12, before everything went to shit. He'd remembered the sequence perfectly. Jack, lug nuts, spare lower. Methodical. Got that from me, not Marie. Marie was watching Prejean's arm with this look of absolute horror, like she was seeing something from a nightmare she'd had once but couldn't quite remember. That's not, people don't. I know. I got the panel off. The conduit shaft yawned behind it, dark and claustrophobic. Perfect. Everyone's going up. Single file. Kids first. Up where? LSU polo shirt demanded. His name tag said visitor, Andrew Petit. His son was maybe 16, looked like he played baseball. The grandmother was crying quietly, clutching a Bible. Maintenance corridor. Runs behind C block. From there, maybe we can reach the loading dock, get outside before. Before what? Before whatever happened in C block spread to the entire prison. Before Thibodeau figured out his Category 3 facility was turning into a Category 5 shitstorm. I didn't finish the sentence. The door lock gave way with a metallic snap. Move. Now. I grabbed Danny by his Saints jersey and pushed him toward the conduit opening. Climb. Don't look back. I'm right behind you. He went. Marie followed, moving faster than I'd seen her move since she was on the high school track team. The other families scrambled after them, all except Andrew Petit, who was still standing there like he was waiting for someone to explain the rules. I can't fit through there, he said. And he was right. Guy had to be 250, most of it around his midsection. The conduit was narrow enough that I'd have to suck in my gut to squeeze through, and I was 30 pounds lighter than him. Behind him, the door swung open. Prejean came through first, or what used to be Prejean. His face was wrong. Skin too gray. Eyes unfocused, but somehow tracking movement. That black shit was leaking from his mouth, from his torn uniform. He'd lost his radio, but he still had his pepper spray canister dangling from his belt. Some part of me wanted to laugh at that. All the procedures and protocols, and it hadn't mattered for shit. Andrew Petit screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over my tool bag. He went down hard, his head cracking against the metal shelf. The sound was awful. Final. I grabbed his son, Jeremy, his name tag said, and shoved him toward the conduit. Go. Follow your friends. The kid went, sobbing. I turned back to Andrew. He was still conscious, but blood was pooling under his head, mixing with the concrete floor's perpetual dampness. Prejean was moving toward him, and behind Prejean, two more figures stumbled into the room. Williams and Boudreau, jaw still hanging wrong. I had maybe 3 seconds. I could try to drag Andrew to the conduit, but he was too heavy, too injured, and those things were too close. Or I could get myself into that shaft and seal it behind me, leave Andrew to. To what? Become one of them? I'm sorry, I said to Andrew. Don't know if he heard me over his son screaming from the conduit shaft. Then I was moving, climbing into the shaft, pulling the panel closed behind me. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was Prejean falling on Andrew Petit like a man who hadn't eaten in weeks. The screaming lasted longer than it should have. The maintenance shaft smelled like ozone and rat shit. I was climbing blind, hands finding purchase on the electrical conduits that lined the walls, my boots slipping on metal brackets that were probably older than Danny. Above me, I could hear Marie breathing hard, could hear the other families scrambling up toward the second floor access point. Below me, Andrew Petit's screams had stopped. That was somehow worse than hearing them. Keep moving, I called up. My voice echoed in the shaft, sounding tinnier than it should have. Don't stop until you reach the horizontal corridor. I can't see anything. That was Jeremy, voice cracking with panic and grief. His father was dead. His father was dead, and I'd left him there, and now we were climbing through a 2-foot-wide shaft in the dark, because I'd made a choice in 3 seconds that would probably haunt me for however long I had left to be haunted. Danny, you got that flashlight? Yeah. His voice came from maybe 15 feet above me. The flashlight clicked on, and I saw his legs first, those Nikes gripping the conduit brackets, then the beam swinging around to illuminate the shaft. It was worse than I'd thought. The conduit was older than I'd estimated, sections of it corroded and weeping moisture. One good pull, and the whole thing might come loose from its moorings. Don't put your weight on the conduit itself, I said, trying to sound calm. Use the brackets. They're bolted into the concrete. How far? Marie's voice. She was just above Danny, and I could hear her breath coming in gasps. She'd put on weight since I'd been inside. Stress weight, the kind you get from working 2 jobs and raising a teenager alone. How far until we're out of this thing? 20 feet, maybe. Then there's an access panel to the corridor. And then what? The grandmother. Her voice was surprisingly steady. Young man, I don't mean to be rude, but what's your plan once we're in this corridor? Honest answer? I didn't have one. The maintenance corridor ran the length of the prison's exterior wall, with access points at each cell block. If we headed toward A block, minimum security, we might find guards who still had the situation under control. Or we might find more of those things. If we went the other way, toward the loading dock, we'd have to pass C block. Maximum security. Where this whole thing started. We head for A block, I said, making the decision as I spoke. Minimum security. Most of those guys are in for non-violent shit. Drug possession, parole violations. Less likely to what? Turn into whatever Prejean turned into. I still didn't understand what I'd seen. Didn't want to understand it. My son, Andrew Petit's wife, I hadn't even caught her name, was somewhere above me. Her voice was hollow. We need to go back for my husband. Nobody said anything. The silence stretched out, filled only with the sound of our breathing and the distant rumble of something happening elsewhere in the prison. Water through pipes maybe, or more of them moving through the corridors. Ma'am, I started then stopped. What could I say? Your husband's gone. He's one of them now. I'd seen enough to know that whatever was happening to the infected was fast. Prejean had been grabbed maybe 5 minutes ago, and he'd already been up and moving, coordinated enough to break through a door. We can't go back, Marie said it for me. I'm sorry, but we can't. The grandmother started praying. Not loud, just a whisper that carried down the shaft. Yeah, though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I kept climbing. The access panel was where I remembered it, second floor, bolted into the concrete with hex screws. I had to contort myself at an awkward angle to reach it, my shoulders wedged against the conduit, one hand working the screwdriver, while the other gripped a bracket that felt like it might pull loose any second. The hex screws were rusted. Naturally. "Come on, you piece of shit." I was talking to the screws, but really I was talking to every shortcut contractor, every corner-cutting inspector, every pencil-pushing bureaucrat who'd signed off on this place being fit for human occupation. The first screw finally turned, metal squealing against rust. Above me, Danny said, "Dad, I hear something." I stopped, listened. The shaft amplified sounds weirdly. You could hear things from blocks away, filtered and distorted, until you couldn't tell if they were close or far. But Danny was right. There was something. A scraping sound, rhythmic and wrong, like someone dragging metal against concrete. "How far?" Marie asked. "I don't know. Could be anywhere." I went back to work on the screws. Second one came loose faster. Third one stripped. The threads were shot. I had to lever the screwdriver under the screw head and pry it out, which meant the panel wouldn't seal properly once we were through. But that was a future problem, and right now, future problems were looking pretty optimistic. The fourth screw fell free and disappeared into darkness below us. The panel swung open on ancient hinges, revealing the maintenance corridor beyond. It was lit by the same emergency lighting as everywhere else, that yellow glow that made everything look diseased. The corridor was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, and it ran perpendicular to the cell blocks. I could see doors every 30 feet or so, each one marked with block letters. C block, B block, A block. Everyone through. Quiet now. I pulled myself into the corridor and reached back to help Marie up. She came through breathing hard, her administrative assistant blouse torn at the shoulder. Danny followed, then Jeremy Petit, his face streaked with tears, but his jaw set in that way teenage boys get when they're trying not to cry anymore. The grandmother came last. She was maybe 70, and the climb had cost her something. Her hands were shaking, and when I grabbed her arm to pull her through, her skin felt paper thin, like I might tear it just by holding too tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "My grandson's in D block. Armed robbery. He's not a bad boy, just..." I know, because that was the thing about Rustwater. Nobody was purely bad or purely good. We were all just people who'd made shitty decisions, and now we were living with them. Or dying with them. The scraping sound was louder now. Closer. It was coming from the direction of C block. "Move toward A block," I said. "Stay against the wall, stay quiet. If I say run, you run." We moved in single file. The corridor's floor was concrete, which was good. Concrete didn't creak. But it also meant any sound carried, including our footsteps, including Marie's hitched breathing, including the grandmother's prayer that had turned into a nearly inaudible mumble. We passed the door marked C block. It was steel, with a small window at head height. I made the mistake of looking through it. The cell block beyond was chaos. Not the organized chaos of a prison riot. I'd seen those on TV, all the documentaries about Angola and Parchman. This was something else. The cells were open, all of them, like someone had hit the master release. Inmates were in the common area, but they weren't rioting. They were feeding. I turned away before my brain could process more details. But the image stayed with me. The way they moved in clusters. The way the emergency lighting made their shadows long and distorted. The way some of them were wearing officer uniforms. "Don't look," I told the others. But Jeremy had already looked. He made a sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. We kept moving. A block's door was 50 feet ahead. I could see it clearly now, and more importantly, I could see light under it. Not emergency lights, regular fluorescence. Which meant A block still had power. Which meant maybe someone was still in control there. We were maybe 20 feet from the door when I heard Thibodeau's voice. It came through a speaker mounted in the ceiling, the PA system, which meant it was broadcasting throughout the entire prison. His voice was strained but trying for calm. The voice of someone who'd read the manual for crisis situations and was now discovering the manual didn't cover this. "Attention all personnel. Facility-wide lockdown is in effect. All inmates are to return to their cells immediately. Any inmate found outside designated areas will be subject to use of force protocols. Repeat, facility-wide lockdown." The announcement cut off mid-sentence. Then a different sound came through the speakers. Wet, tearing, and underneath it, Thibodeau screaming. The lights went out. Not the emergency lights. Those stayed on, running off the backup generators like they were designed to. But the regular lights, the ones that had been glowing under the A-block door, they died. And in that moment of darkness transitioning to emergency lighting, I heard the A-block door unlock with a mechanical click. It swung open slowly. From inside, I could see shapes moving. Too many shapes. And they were all heading toward the corridor entrance, toward us, drawn by Thibodeau's interrupted announcement and the smell of, what? Fresh meat? Uninfected blood? I didn't know and didn't want to know. Back. I grabbed Danny's arm. Back toward B block. Move. We ran. The grandmother couldn't keep up, and I ended up half carrying her, one arm around her waist while she wheezed and prayed, and told me her grandson's name was Marcus. No, wait, shit, generic name, but I was too busy running to care. Behind us, the shapes from A block were spilling into the corridor. They moved wrong, like their bodies hadn't gotten the memo about physics and human limitations. The B block door. It was our only option. I hit the access handle, praying it wasn't locked, praying the emergency protocols hadn't sealed every door in the facility. The handle turned. Thank Christ, the handle turned. We tumbled through into B block as the first of them reached the corridor behind us. I slammed the door and spun the lock wheel, and through the small window, I saw faces, not anymore, but shapes that had been faces, pressing against the glass. We're trapped, Marie said. She was looking around B block's common area, and she was right. B block was medium security, which meant cells on 2 tiers surrounding a common area with tables bolted to the floor. And every single cell door was open. Empty. The inmates were gone, either dead or turned or escaped into the bowels of the prison. But they weren't in here. Not yet. Danny was staring at one of the tables. Someone had left a tray there, meatloaf and mashed potatoes from yesterday's lunch, now congealed and cold. Next to it, a magazine. Sports Illustrated, Michael Thomas on the cover. Dad, he said quietly. What do we do now? I looked at my son, at Marie, at Jeremy Petit, who'd just lost his father, at the grandmother whose grandson was probably dead or worse, at the door we'd just locked, which was already starting to shudder under the weight of bodies pressing against it. I looked at my hands. Still had that wire smell. Still had calluses. Still had everything I needed to survive except a plan that didn't end with all of us dead. We go up, I said, because that was the only direction left. B block's upper tier was a metal catwalk with cells on one side and a 20-foot drop to the concrete common area on the other. The cells were standard 8x10 boxes, bunks, toilet, sink, narrow window with bars. I'd never been in this block before. My work assignments kept me in A block and the administrative areas. But all the blocks were laid out the same, and I knew from the wiring schematics I'd studied that there was a ceiling access panel at the far end of the tier. Maintenance access to the HVAC system. Getting to it meant crossing the entire catwalk with those things pounding on the door below us. Single file, I said. Stay against the wall, away from the railing. We moved like a chain gang, each person's hand on the shoulder of the person in front. The catwalk was narrow enough that my right arm kept brushing the cell bars, and in one of them, I saw a personal photo taped to the wall. A woman and 2 kids, all of them smiling at a birthday party. The cake had a Spider-Man design. The pounding on the door was getting worse. Rhythmic now. Organized. Like they were learning. They're coordinating, Jeremy said. His voice was flat, shock giving way to something else. Calculation, maybe. That's not random. They're working together. Don't think about it, I told him. But he was right. Prejean breaking through that first door had been chaotic, animal. This was different. This was problem solving. We reached the end of the catwalk. The access panel was above us, a metal square in the ceiling, held by 4 wing nuts. I could reach it if I stood on the railing, but the railing was already loose. I could feel it shift when I put weight on it. Marie, hold my legs. She did, and I climbed onto the railing, my boots balanced on corroded metal that had probably failed its last safety inspection. I could see the entire common area from up here. The door was bulging inward now, the lock mechanism starting to fail. Through the window, I could count maybe a dozen of them. The ones in front were pushing so hard their faces were deforming against the glass. I got the first wing nut loose. It fell and hit the catwalk with a metallic ping that echoed too loud. The second nut was seized. I had to wrench it with my palm, feeling the edges cut into my skin. Blood made my grip slippery. Hurry, the grandmother whispered. She was swaying on her feet, exhausted or having a heart attack or both. Her grandson Marcus, damn it, I'd promised myself no generic names, but her grandson whose name I'd forgotten in the chaos, had probably been in C block when whatever happened happened. She knew it. We all knew it. Third nut. Fourth nut. The panel came loose just as the B block door finally gave way. Up. Now. I grabbed Danny first, lifted him bodily through the access hole. He disappeared into darkness above. Marie followed, then Jeremy. Then I had to basically push the grandmother through while she apologized and prayed and told me her grandson loved fishing at Lake Pontchartrain. The first of them hit the bottom of the stairs to our tier. I pulled myself through the access hole and reached back down to grab the panel, trying to slide it closed. But the angle was wrong, and I couldn't get leverage. Below me, I could see them coming up the stairs. Not running, they didn't need to run. We had nowhere to go but up. I let go of the panel. It wouldn't matter anyway. The HVAC crawlspace was maybe 3 feet high and ran the length of the building. It was hot up here. All the ductwork was exposed, and Louisiana spring heat turned metal ducts into radiators. We crawled through dust and rat droppings and 3 decades of accumulated maintenance neglect. Behind us, I could hear them entering the crawlspace, moving faster than we could crawl. There, Danny's flashlight beam found something ahead. A vertical shaft, the main HVAC trunk line, running from the basement to the roof, and attached to the shaft's side a ladder. Maintenance access for the rooftop units. We could go up to the roof. We could go down to the basement. Both were terrible options, but staying here wasn't an option at all. Roof, I said, making the decision for everyone. Because basements flood in Louisiana, and flooding basements in a prison overrun by infected seemed like a particularly bad way to die. Danny went first. The ladder rungs were aluminum, bolted into the concrete shaft walls. Some of the bolts were loose. The ladder swayed as we climbed, each person's weight adding to the structural stress. Marie was crying now, not loud, just quiet tears that meant she'd moved past panic into that place where you accept that you're probably going to die and you just want it to be quick. Jeremy was muttering something. Not prayer, numbers. He was counting ladder rungs. 23, 24, 25. Coping mechanism. Good kid. The grandmother had stopped talking. Her breathing was wet and ragged. Congestive heart failure maybe. Or just 70 years of living catching up with her in the worst possible moment. We climbed. Below us, they entered the shaft. I could hear them, could hear the ladder rungs creaking under their weight. They were climbing slower than us. Their motor control was deteriorating, or maybe they just didn't have the same survival motivation pushing them upward. But they were persistent. That was the thing that scared me most. Not the speed, but the persistence. The shaft opened onto the roof through a maintenance hatch. Danny pushed it open and Gulf Coast sunlight poured in, so bright after the yellow emergency lighting that I had to squint. We emerged onto the flat roof like people crawling out of graves, blinking and disoriented. The roof was tar paper and gravel, with HVAC units scattered across it like metal islands. Beyond the prison walls, which from up here I could see were only 12 feet high, not nearly as imposing as they seemed from ground level. I could see the Mississippi in the distance, brown and swollen with spring runoff. And closer, in the parking lot, I could see cars. Marie's Toyota Camry with the dented bumper. Jeremy's father's Suburban. The grandmother's ancient Buick. They looked so normal. So close. Might as well have been on the moon. We made it, Marie said. She was looking at me like she expected me to have a plan now. Like climbing to the roof was step one of something larger. I didn't have a plan. I had a roof, and below us, the maintenance hatch that we couldn't secure, and in the distance, the sound of helicopters. News choppers maybe. Or National Guard. Too far away to help. The grandmother collapsed. Just folded up like her bones had turned to water. I caught her before she hit the gravel, lowered her down gently. Her eyes were open, but not seeing anything. Heart attack. Or stroke. Or just her body deciding it had pushed far enough. No, no, no. Jeremy dropped beside her, started doing chest compressions like they taught you in health class. But her sternum cracked under his hands, osteoporosis, and I could see from the way her pupils were fixed that it didn't matter. She was already gone. Jeremy. I put my hand on his shoulder. Stop. She's gone. We just left my dad. He shoved me away, kept doing compressions. Crack. 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 We just left him, and now we can't just. Danny pulled him away. My son, who I'd taught to change a tire and wire a light switch and measure twice before cutting, pulled this kid off his dead grandmother and held him while he sobbed. When had Danny gotten strong enough to do that? The maintenance hatch rattled. They were coming. I looked around the roof. HVAC units. Gravel. The guard towers at each corner, empty now because the guards were either dead or had abandoned their posts. And at the north corner, overlooking the loading dock, a fire escape. Old, rusted, probably hadn't been inspected since Reagan was president. But it led down. There. I pointed. Fire escape. We get down, we get to the vehicles. We drive until we're somewhere that's not here. The keys are in the visitation lockers, Marie said. Practical even in crisis. That's why I'd married her. We can't get to them without going back inside. She was right. Visitors weren't allowed to bring keys into the facility. Everything went into lockers at check-in, which meant our escape vehicles were useless. Unless, how many of you know how to hotwire a car? I asked. Silence. Of course, law-abiding citizens didn't learn how to hotwire cars. I'd learned from my uncle Raphael, who'd done time at Angola for auto theft back in the 80s. Family trade. I can do it, I said. But we need to get down there first, and we need to do it before those things figure out where we went. The hatch burst open. Prejean came through first, moving in that wrong way, his officer uniform torn and stained with that black ooze. Behind him, more of them. Too many to count. Run! I grabbed Danny's arm, pulled him toward the fire escape. Marie was already moving, Jeremy stumbling after her. We ran across the roof, gravel crunching under our feet, the sun beating down on us like we were roaches exposed by someone lifting a board. The fire escape was worse than I'd thought. The bolts holding it to the wall were rusted through, and the first ladder section was missing entirely. Dropped off years ago, probably never replaced. There was a 15-foot gap between the roof and where the ladder started. We have to jump, Danny said. He was looking down at the ladder platform, calculating distance. It's possible. I've jumped farther in gym class. You're not jumping. But even as I said it, I knew there was no choice. Behind us, Prejean was 30 feet away. 20 feet. His dead eyes fixed on us with that terrible purpose. Danny jumped. He hit the platform hard, and I heard him grunt with impact, but he stayed on his feet. Come on. Marie went next. She was heavier, less athletic, and she nearly missed. Her hands caught the railing, and for a terrible second she was hanging, feet dangling, and I thought we'd lose her. But Danny grabbed her wrists and pulled, and then she was up. Jeremy was frozen, looking at the gap, looking at his grandmother's body on the roof, looking at the things that were 10 feet away now. Jeremy, you have to move. I yelled. He jumped. Didn't make it. His fingers caught the edge of the platform, but his weight pulled him backward. He hung there for maybe 2 seconds, making a sound like a trapped animal, and then his fingers slipped and he fell. 2 stories. Onto concrete. The sound he made when he hit was something I'll hear for the rest of my life. However long that is. Prejean was 5 feet away. I jumped, caught the railing with both hands, my shoulders screaming with the impact. Below me, I could see Jeremy. He was alive, moving, trying to crawl. But his legs were bent wrong, and there was blood spreading under him in a pool that was growing too fast. I pulled myself onto the platform. Down. We have to get down. The ladder was in sections, connected by pins that should have been replaced decades ago. We descended as fast as we could, the metal groaning and swaying. Above us, Prejean reached the roof edge and stopped. Just stood there, looking down at us. Like he was calculating whether the fall was worth it. He jumped, landed on the platform we'd just left, and the whole structure shuddered. Bolts popped loose from the wall, and the ladder section below us, the one Marie and Danny and I were on, started to separate from the one above. We were maybe 8 feet from the ground. Jump! I pushed Danny off first, then Marie. They landed and rolled, and I jumped after them just as the ladder section fell away completely, crashing into the loading dock with a sound like the end of the world. Prejean and the others were trapped on the platform above, but more were coming out of the maintenance hatch. And Jeremy was on the ground, bleeding, crawling toward us, making sounds that weren't words. I ran to him. His eyes were wide, conscious, aware. He grabbed my hand. Don't, he said. Don't leave me like my dad. I won't. But I was lying. Because the first of them was dropping from the platform above, hitting the ground and getting back up even with bones that should have been shattered. And more were coming. Go, Jeremy said. Blood was coming from his mouth now. Just go. I went. Marie and Danny were already at the parking lot fence, chain link, easy to climb. I followed them, and behind me, I heard Jeremy start screaming. Not fear screaming, pain screaming. The kind that means something is eating you while you're still alive enough to feel it. I didn't look back. Marie's Camry was in the second row, and I had maybe 90 seconds before the ones feeding on Jeremy figured out we'd gone over the fence. I kicked in the driver's side window, safety glass, so it crumbled instead of shattering, and popped the hood release. Danny was beside me, breathing hard, his Saints jersey soaked with sweat and streaked with the roof's tar. "What do you need?" he asked. "Screwdriver. Anything metal. Check the other cars, somebody left something." He ran. Marie was at the fence, watching the loading dock area. "They're coming," she said. "Maybe 20 of them." I found the ignition harness under the steering column, pulled it loose. Red wire, power. Brown wire, starter. Yellow wire, accessory. I needed to strip the insulation, connect red and brown to get the engine running. My hands were shaking. When was the last time I'd hotwired a car? 15 years? 20? Danny came back with a church key, bottle opener from someone's keychain. Close enough. I used the pointed end to strip the wires, twisted red and brown together. The dashboard lights came on. Yes. I touched the brown wire to the starter connection, and the engine turned over. Coughed. Died. "Come on." Marie was in the back seat now. The first of them was at the fence, climbing over. Prejean. Still wearing his wedding ring. Still my neighbor in Napoleonville. The guy who'd helped me install a ceiling fan 2 months before I killed that family on Highway 61. I tried again. The engine caught, sputtered, caught again. The Camry's engine was a 4-cylinder that sounded like it was held together by prayers and credit card debt, but it was running. I threw it in gear and punched the gas just as Prejean reached the driver's side door. His hand slapped the window where I'd kicked it in, and for a second, his fingers were inside the car, grabbing at my shirt. Then we were moving, and he was left behind, stumbling after us with that terrible persistence. The parking lot exit was straight ahead, and beyond it, the state highway. Freedom. Except the exit gate was closed, heavy steel controlled from the guard booth, which was empty. Hold on. I aimed the Camry at the gate, praying that the state of Louisiana had cheaped out on gate construction the same way they'd cheaped out on everything else in Rustwater. We hit it doing 40. The impact threw us forward. No airbags in a 2003 Camry, and my chest hit the steering wheel hard enough to crack something. But the gate gave way, folding outward in a screech of metal and chain, and then we were through onto the highway, leaving Rustwater Correctional in the rearview mirror. I drove. Didn't know where. Just drove. Away from the prison. Away from the things that used to be people. Away from Andrew Petit and Jeremy, and the grandmother whose grandson loved fishing. Away from Prejean's wedding ring, and the sounds Jeremy made when they started eating him. Danny was in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Not crying. Not speaking. Just staring at the Louisiana landscape rolling past. Cypress swamps and gas stations and churches with signs promising salvation. Marie was in the back, her phone out, trying to get a signal. Calling 911. Calling anyone. No signal, she said finally. Or nobody's answering. I don't know which. We passed a Waffle House. Empty parking lot. Lights off. An abandoned semi-truck by the side of the road. Driver's side door hanging open. A sheriff's cruiser at a gas station, no sheriff in sight. Dad. Danny's voice was quiet. What was that? What were they? I don't know. Don't lie to me. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were red but dry. You've been lying to me for 3 years. About the accident. About how you're sorry. About how everything's going to be okay. Don't lie now. He was right. I'd been lying. Telling him the accident was a mistake, that I'd learned my lesson, that his father wasn't the kind of man who'd drink a 12-pack of Abita and then drive his truck into a Nissan Altima carrying a mother and her 2 kids. That his father wasn't the kind of man who'd leave Jeremy Petit to die screaming because saving him wasn't practical. I don't know what they were, I said again. But they used to be people. Used to be Prejean and Boudreaux and Williams. And then something happened, and they weren't people anymore. Just things that looked like people. Could we turn into them? Marie asked. I don't know. Maybe. If they bit us or... I didn't finish. Because I didn't know. None of us knew. We were making it up as we went, survivors in a situation that had no manual, no procedure, no trained authority figure to tell us what to do. We passed a sign, Baton Rouge 43 miles. Where are we going? Danny asked. Baton Rouge. Find people. Find help. Find what? Safety? Answers? Some explanation for why Rustwater Correctional had turned into hell on earth in the span of 30 minutes? We should find a TV, Marie said. News. Someone has to be reporting this. We found a TV 20 miles later at a pilot travel center off exit 52. The parking lot was full but silent. Cars and trucks parked neatly, no people visible. The automatic doors still worked, sliding open with a cheerful chime when we approached. Inside was worse than outside. The store looked normal, aisles of chips and candy, coffee machines brewing unattended, country music playing from overhead speakers. But there was blood on the floor, a trail of it leading toward the restrooms, and slumped against the magazine rack, a woman in a pilot uniform. Her name tag said Bethany. She'd been clawed or bitten, her neck torn open, but she was still breathing. Barely. "Help," she whispered when she saw us. "Please. It hurts." Marie started toward her, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't. She needs help. Look at her eyes." Bethany's eyes were changing, the whites turning gray, the pupils dilating wrong. Whatever had happened to Prejean was happening to her, just slower. We had maybe minutes before she stopped being Bethany and started being something else. "I'm sorry," I told her, and I meant it, but I pulled Marie away, toward the back office where I could see a TV mounted on the wall. The TV was on, every channel showing the same thing, emergency broadcasts. The governor's face, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, National Guard soldiers with rifles, urging all residents to remain in their homes. The situation in southeastern parishes is under control. Reports of violence and unusual behavior are being investigated. This is not, I repeat, not a time for panic. Law enforcement and emergency services are responding. The broadcast cut to footage shot from a news helicopter. Not Rustwater, somewhere else. New Orleans, maybe, or Lafayette. The streets were full of them. Hundreds. Thousands. Moving in that wrong way, pulling people from cars, from buildings, spreading like a plague. "Oh my God," Marie whispered. The footage cut back to the governor, but he wasn't talking to the camera anymore. He was talking to someone off-screen, and his microphone was still hot. "What do you mean we've lost contact with 4 parishes? Get me the president. Get me." The broadcast went to static. Danny was staring at the screen. "It's everywhere. Not just the prison. Everywhere." I tried other channels. Same thing. Emergency broadcasts. Static. One channel showing nothing but a test pattern and a message. "Remain in your homes. Do not approach infected individuals. Help is coming." Behind us, Bethany started making sounds. Not words. Not human. "We need to go," I said. We grabbed supplies, water bottles, beef jerky, a first aid kit that probably wouldn't help against whatever was happening, but made us feel like we were doing something. I found a map of Louisiana behind the counter and spread it on the floor. Baton Rouge was northeast. But according to the broadcasts, Baton Rouge was compromised. New Orleans too. Most of the southeast. Where then? Marie asked. I traced routes with my finger. Highway 90 west toward Lafayette, but Lafayette had been in the helicopter footage. Highway 61 north toward Natchez, but that meant crossing the Mississippi, and bridges were choke points. Highway 10. There. Danny pointed to a spot on the map. Grand Isle. It's an island. If this spreads through contact, islands are safer. We get there, find a boat, go farther out if we need to. Smart kid. I'd taught him to change a tire and wire a light switch, but his mother had taught him to think strategically, to plan 3 moves ahead. That was all her. Grand Isle, I agreed. We need to go now. Behind the counter, Bethany stood up. Her movements were still human, but wrong. Jerky. Her gray eyes fixed on us with that terrible hunger. We ran. The Camry started on the first try, which felt like a minor miracle in a day of horrors. We pulled back onto the highway, heading south toward the coast, toward Grand Isle, toward whatever safety we could find in a world that was coming apart faster than we could process. Danny was quiet in the passenger seat, not staring out the window anymore, staring at his hands. They were dirty with roof tar and dust and dried blood from where he'd grabbed the fence. I should have saved them, he said finally. Jeremy, his grandmother. I should have. No, I cut him off. You did what you had to do to survive. That's all any of us can do. You left people too, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. Andrew Petit, Jeremy, you left them so we could live. Yes. Does that make you a bad person? I thought about that, about the family I'd killed 3 years ago, about the lies I'd told myself and Danny, and the parole board about how I'd changed, how I'd learned my lesson, about Jeremy Petit crawling on broken legs, asking me not to leave him like I'd left his father. I don't know, I told my son. Probably, but I'm the bad person who made sure you survived today. So maybe that counts for something. He thought about that for a while. Then he said, when we get to Grand Isle, if we get there, we need to find Mom a gun. What? She doesn't know how to fight. You and me were stronger. But Mom needs a gun. Something she can use to protect herself when we can't. I looked in the rearview mirror. Marie was staring out the window, her phone still in her hand even though there was no signal, no one to call. She'd taken me back after the accident even though everyone told her not to. Married me when we were 19, had Danny when we were 20, stayed with me through 15 years of electrical work that barely paid the bills and beer habits that I swore I'd quit. Yeah, I said. We'll find her a gun. We drove south. The sun was setting over the swamps, turning the water gold and red. Beautiful. On any other day, it would have been beautiful. Today it just looked like the world was bleeding out. We passed abandoned cars, a school bus on its side, a church with its doors torn off the hinges, and in the distance, smoke rising from what might have been Houma or Thibodaux or any of the small towns that dotted the bayou like wounds. Grand Isle was 70 miles away. We had half a tank of gas and whatever luck we'd managed to collect by surviving this long. Danny reached over and turned on the radio. Static on most stations. Then a voice, crackling through interference. Anyone can hear this, head for the coast. Boats are evacuating from Grand Isle, Cameron, Port Fourchon. Military is establishing safe zones on offshore platforms. Repeat, if you can hear this. The signal died. Grand Isle, Danny said. We were right. Yeah. I pressed the gas pedal down. The Camry's engine complained, but gave us more speed. 60 miles per hour. 70. The highway was empty except for abandoned vehicles and things that might have been people once, standing by the roadside, watching us pass with eyes that reflected our headlights like animals. Marie leaned forward between the seats. When we get there, she said, what happens to your sentence? You're still technically an inmate. Vehicular manslaughter. 2 more years. I don't think that matters anymore, I said. It matters to me. Her voice was hard. You killed 3 people, Victor. A mother and her 2 kids. You drank a 12-pack and drove and killed them. And now you're out because the world ended. That's not justice. That's not fair. She was right. It wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair. Not the 3 people I'd killed. Not Andrew Petit dying so we could escape. Not Jeremy screaming while they ate him. Not Danny having to grow up with a father in prison and a world falling apart. No, I agreed. It's not fair. But fair stopped meaning anything about 6 hours ago. We drove in silence after that. Through the twilight, through the dark, through a Louisiana night that should have been full of cricket sounds and radio stations and the ordinary noise of civilization. Instead it was just silent. Silent except for the Camry's struggling engine and the occasional distant scream. We reached Grand Isle at midnight. The town was chaos. Cars everywhere, people loading boats, families arguing about what to take and what to leave. But there were still people. Living people. Uninfected people. That alone felt like a miracle. A Coast Guard officer stopped us at a checkpoint. Really just 2 sawhorses across the road. He was young, maybe 22, and his hands were shaking on his rifle. Vehicle and occupants, he said, trying to sound official. 3 people. We came from Rustwater. The prison upstate. His eyes widened. Rustwater? That was ground zero. Nobody's supposed to have gotten out of there. Well, I said we did. He looked at us, at me in my prison-issued work clothes, at Marie in her torn administrative blouse, at Danny in his Saints jersey, and something in his face shifted. Recognition maybe, or just exhaustion. There's boats leaving every hour. Military set up platforms 50 miles out. They're checking everyone for bites, for infection. If you're clean, you can get on a boat. If you're not, we're clean, I said. He waved us through. We parked the Camry on the beach, alongside hundreds of other vehicles that people had abandoned in favor of survival. The boats were in the distance, their lights bobbing on the dark water. Shrimp boats mostly, the kind that normally hauled nets full of brown shrimp and white shrimp, now hauling nets full of people instead. Danny walked down to the water's edge, staring out at the Gulf. The waves were small tonight, lapping gently at the sand. Peaceful, like they didn't know the world was ending. I stood next to him. You okay? No. He picked up a shell, examined it, threw it into the water. Dad, what did you see? Back in the prison. What were they? I thought about how to answer. About Prejean's wedding ring and Boudreaux's impossible jaw, and the way they'd moved with purpose but without humanity. About how fast it had spread, how coordinated they'd become. About the black ooze that wasn't blood. I don't know, I said. But whatever they were, they're not done. This isn't over. Will we make it? He looked at me. My son, 14 years old. Too young to be asking questions about survival. Too old to be sheltered from the answers. I don't know that either, I told him. Because I'd promised not to lie anymore. But we made it this far. That's something. Marie came down to join us. She'd found a jacket somewhere, was wearing it over her torn blouse. She looked older than she had this morning. We all did. The boats leave in 20 minutes, she said. They're loading families first. We're a family, Danny said. It wasn't a question, but it kind of was. Marie looked at me. I looked back, and in that moment, I understood that nothing about us was resolved. Not my crime, not her forgiveness, not whether I deserved a second chance or whether survival meant redemption. But we were alive, and in a world where people turned into monsters and prisons became slaughterhouses and civilization collapsed in the span of a day, being alive was enough. Yeah, Marie said finally. We're a family. We walked to the boats together, past Coast Guard checkpoints and medical screenings and frightened people who were asking the same questions we were. What happened? Where do we go? What do we do now? Nobody had answers. But we had boats. And beyond the boats, somewhere out in the dark Gulf, there were platforms. Safe zones. Tomorrow problems. I looked back once at the Camry, abandoned on the beach with hundreds of others. Then at Grand Isle, the lights starting to go out one by one as people evacuated. Then at Rustwater, somewhere back in the dark distance, full of things that used to be people. I thought about Andrew Petit, asking me what my plan was. Thought about Jeremy, begging me not to leave him. Thought about the grandmother whose grandson loved fishing. Thought about all the choices I'd made today, leaving people behind, breaking rules, surviving when others didn't. I didn't know if those choices made me a good person or a bad one. Didn't know if I deserved to be on these boats, heading towards safety, while Jeremy Petit was still back there screaming. But I knew I'd done what I had to do to keep Danny alive. And Marie. And myself. And maybe that was all any father could do. Make the terrible choices so your kid didn't have to. The boat was called the Nancy Marie. 40-foot shrimper with rust on the hull and prayers painted on the cabin. We climbed aboard with 30 other people, packed in so tight you couldn't move without touching someone. The engine coughed to life, and we started pulling away from shore. Danny was pressed against the railing, watching Grand Isle recede. The lights were mostly out now. In another hour, it would be dark. In another day, it would be empty. In another week, it might be gone entirely, swallowed by whatever was spreading from Rustwater and 100 other ground zeros we didn't know about yet. Dad, Danny said, back at the prison, when you had to choose between saving people and saving us, would you do it again? I thought about lying. Thought about telling him I'd find a different way, that I'd save everyone next time. But I'd promised not to lie. Yes, I said. Every time. He nodded. Didn't say if that was the right answer or the wrong one. Just nodded and kept watching the shore disappear. The boat headed out into the Gulf, toward the platforms, toward whatever came next. Behind us, Louisiana burned. Ahead of us, the dark water stretched on forever. And somewhere in between, we were still alive. Still a family. Still trying to figure out if surviving made us lucky or just delayed the inevitable. I put my arm around Danny's shoulders. He didn't pull away. That was something.